Well, howdy, roofers, and welcome to Roofer Growth Hacks, the podcast that's dedicated to highlighting those in the roofing industry, learning how they overcame growth challenges with creative growth hacks and connect them with others in the roofing industry. I'm your host, Chris Hunter, founder and chief marketing officer of roofingsites.com. I'm also the author of The Ultimate Guide to Digital Marketing for Roofers. Got a little story for you. Vicki Suiter is the author of The Profit Bleed, How Managing Margin Can Save Your Contracting Business. She's also the owner of Suiter Business Builders. Vicki helps contractors grow their business by helping them build a solid foundation for profit margins, build better team accountability, and build efficient systems that allow business owners to take time off while ensuring their operations run smoothly. In this episode, Vicki shares some huge value bombs on how to be clear with your employees and free up your time. So be sure to listen up as she shares some awesome growth hacks. Well, roofers, we have a special guest here today. Vicki, thank you so much for coming on Roofer Growth Hacks. I know that I've got a ton of questions for you, but thanks so much for coming on.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, let's start off all of this with, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us about your business. Give us some background on your entrepreneurial journey and really just where you are now and how you help people.
My entrepreneurial journey. Well, I actually started out being married to a painting contractor long ago and far away. And it's really what gave me the introduction to the industry to start with. And when I started my business, I realized, just in having helped build, that I had something I could contribute specifically in the arena of financial management, how people run their businesses, understanding their numbers. And that was 30 plus years ago. So my business has evolved a lot over the years. So really the focus of what I do with clients now is I help them make more money on the bottom line, have more fun in what they do, and really understand and have that sense of freedom and choice about how they spend their time. And in all of that kind of comes down to understanding how you run your business and what are the critical elements that drive your success. But it also comes down to how to be a great leader and understanding what does it take to do that. So those are kind of like that's the primary thing. It's that I really focus on when I work with people.
So leadership is a big thing with me. I'm heavily involved in the scouting organization. I have almost 2 Eagle Scouts. One, I say almost because one is it's close. He just has to do his project now. Leadership, and to me, Boy Scouts of America, or BSA, is a leadership program. Literally, we're growing leaders, right? So let's dig in a little bit on that whole leadership thing. What is the biggest key that you see there for building leaders?
Well, I think that one of the very first things is understanding that nobody wakes up in the morning and goes, how can I mess up today? That fundamentally, as human beings, we all have a desire and to want to be able to make a contribution, have value, to be able to feel seen and heard, and like what we do matters. And I don't care if you're the janitor or you're, the VP. And so, a lot of times I see that what it really comes down to is that people don't give people a clear direction, and there's not we treat people like helpers. We don't actually give them the result and teach them how to win the game. It's because a lot of us were not trained or taught how to be good leaders to start with, how to really look at our job as leaders and as business owners is really to develop people. And we think that it's to get them to get work done. But really, if we want people to take ownership, if we want them to take responsibility, which all of us do, then you got to realize that your focus, you really want to spend time on developing people and looking at where are people's strengths and where are their weaknesses and how can you fill in. And just that we ask somebody to do something and we get disappointed when they can't do it. Well, yeah, are we investing in the right training and helping them be successful in the job? That's really ultimately employees is the way that you grow your business, right? And understanding that at some point, being the technician is not our job. Being a leader and setting the course and developing your people, that is our job as leaders.
Interesting. So how do you do that? How do you actually, and follow-up question on that, how do you allot time to do that? Because that's the biggest part, I think, with entrepreneurship is we wear so many hats.
Yeah.
How do you find time to do that? How does a roofing contractor sitting out there listening, go, okay, well, that sounds great, Vicki, but how do I do that?
Yeah, it's what I call a little bit of like going through the eye of the needle, Chris, which is, and I've worked with hundreds of contractors over the years, and this is always the point at which one has to choose. Am I just going to keep working in the business and trying to grind at it? Or am I going to carve out some time to really work on my business? And if you never carve out time to work on your business, you'll always be run by it. And you'll always be limited in terms of how much you can grow. And working on your business includes things like, do I have a financial plan? And am I working on my team and developing my team, hiring the right people? Like, do I have a good hiring process in place? And in terms, of your question of how do you do that? How do you develop team? The first thing I always start with is, let's be really clear about what are all the seats on the bus? Like, what positions do you need in your organization? Not people, not personalities and people, but what does your organization need in order to support the operations of it? And then looking at what are the key deliverables of each of those positions and being super clear about that. And when I say key deliverables, I mean, I've worked in this industry exclusively for all of these years. And what I have learned is while construction is very complex, running a contracting business doesn't have to be. And that if you know how to keep your finger on the pulse of the most critical drivers in every department in your organization, that you can ultimately, understanding that and understanding how to manage to those critical drivers will always let you touch on what it is that may not be working or what needs to be corrected or the most critical elements. And honestly, every position, and I've written position agreements specific to the construction industry. And what I have always found is that there's always about 2 to 3 key things that if you just do those 2 to 3 key things consistently, let's say if I'm a foreman, right? You're looking at hours burned every week against your budget. You're doing 2-week look aheads, which happens every week. And depending on the size of a construction company, that might be a little bit more often. It might be a little less often, depending on the size of your projects. But if you do those things, what it does is it lifts up your head, has you look out and go, where am I now compared to where I want to be? So it's that thing of moving out of the grind and like, what's the thing that's going to make me lift up my head, look out and see where I'm headed before I get there in order to be able to have more control over those results? If I'm a project manager, it's schedules and cost to complete. If I'm the, salesperson, I'm paying attention to close rate and what's in my pipeline. There's a whole spectrum from what are you doing to make the phone ring, which is your expertise, right? Like, what am I doing to make the phone ring, all the way through a project is complete? And how am I doing as a business overall? The more you can see where you're headed before it's history, the more control you have over the results in your contracting business. So when it comes to employees, a lot of times it's like and sometimes us as entrepreneurs and leaders will get caught up in the detail, and we never lift our head up and go, are we paying attention to that most critical thing? So what I find is that's one of the places where I always will start working with people is, are you really clear about what are the top 3 key deliverables? And then having position agreements that spell out specifically, like when I say specifically, like it can be measured and it's time driven. If it can't be measured by them and you, it can't be managed by them or you.
Yeah. So
it's got to be measurable. So the more measurable it is, the more you set people up for success. The more like, hey, if I'm really clear every Thursday, I've got a 2-week look ahead completed and we're sitting down and meeting about it. Now I got to practice. And here's what's interesting, because this goes back to the other question that you had about like, where do people find time? The interesting thing is when you get really intentional, and you've probably seen this too, when you get really intentional about how we run our businesses and how we manage with our teams, you spend less time in crisis management because you saw what was coming before it was history and you intervened in it here, as opposed to, oh my gosh, my hair is on fire all the time. Can I just share a quick story about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I would love to hear.
So there was he was a senior project manager, and he had 5 foremen working for him. And this guy, like all day long, all he did was put out fires. And when I first started meeting with Zach and talking with him, I was like, so tell me, like, what is it that's got your hair on fire? He's like, he's a general contractor. He goes, I'm dealing with like intervening with subs and materials, and my foremen are calling me all the time, and labor and scheduling labor. He was the conduit through which everything flowed. And I'm like, you got to shift that. Like, that's not a good model. Let's talk about how do you start to, first of all, define, like, let's talk about what's the position of a foreman in your company. What should they be doing? What should they be owning? And what should your role be? Because I'm pretty sure putting out fires isn't it. I'm pretty sure it's like on time, on budget as promised. That's meeting with clients, doing scheduling, 2-week look at like cost to complete. You're paying attention to where it's headed. Right now, you're just in the fire every day. And so what we did is we put in position agreements with the foreman. He got them involved and got them, had their input about like what was the criteria for success in their job. And he shifted from him being the one to do all the scheduling and then having them do the 2-week look ahead. And it took a while. It wasn't an overnight thing. But what was interesting to watch is as soon as, first of all, he put position agreements, what a lot of people call job descriptions, I call them position agreements because I literally look at them like they're an agreement, like a contract with you and them. And not in a negative way, but in an empowering way that goes, hey, I want input from you. I want us to have an agreement about, are we clear? What's your growth plan is built into that. When that was really clear, the foremen, first of all, were like, oh my gosh, thank you. Like, thanks for the clarity. I've been, some of them been working for that company for years, that they were just like, whatever it was that, was being demanded is what they were doing. They were like very grateful and thankful for it. And then the 2-week look ahead, when that really took hold in their company, completely transformed Zach's world, because he went from being a firefighter all the time to having those weekly meetings with the foreman. Yeah. Now the foremen were more efficient. They were wasting less time. Their costs went down because we all know, like, if you're running to the supply store and you're the foreman and it's, Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, and everybody's waiting for you, and they're driving a company truck, cost you a small fortune. So like some of that, all that started to really shift because they were thinking ahead, they were planning ahead. His life and his job completely changed. He started spending more time working with his foreman, developing their skills. He was spending more time meeting with homeowners, staying in front of issues with homeowners so that they weren't like in this constant, again, firefighting mode. Yeah. And scheduling better so that he could help his foreman have a better experience in doing their job and be able to be more skilled at being able to do a 2-week look ahead. But it's like he had to get on the other side of that. And it took some time. When he put in the 2-week look ahead, it didn't change overnight, but it was that he invested. He just kept doing it. And he had a set meeting every week. It was a non-negotiable. And I have to tell you, the most successful contractors I know, they have very specific set agendas and very specific times they meet, and they're non-negotiables. It's like, you don't get to say client meeting. Like if your wife, your kid, or your mother's sick, great. Like other than that, you're there. And just that discipline started to build this muscle memory of, oh, we show up, we have our form filled out. Like the mechanism had helped their foreman really become so much more skilled at their job. And they were really grateful to be able to have a foreman format where they could ask questions, where they could stay in front of it, where their lives now became less chaotic too. And they were so glad to have him out of the middle of the mix because it was like, now they're not waiting on this one guy to have to do with, all these people's projects.
Love that. Absolutely love that. So a question that that came up to me is, right, what if you're, that company owner that's a kind of a micromanager, right? You want to be in on all of the details there, right? How do you coach that person out of that habit?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So one of the things I always say to people is, I know you want to delegate, but there's a distinction between delegation and abdication. So if you just abdicate and you go, there you go, I hired you, go do that.
Yeah.
Which most people won't do. You get a little too freaked out, and then you do it, and then you go grab it and bring it back because you're like, I don't know what's going on, right? So you've got to have feedback. And, there's a question that you had posed to me about, like, if I had one piece of advice to give a roofing business owner, what would I tell them? Yeah. I would say have good feedback and good data, because if you're not getting any feedback or data, like, let's use the example of, if I'm the foreman, am I getting labor hours burned against budget? And am I doing a 2-week look ahead? That's data, right? That tells us something about where we're headed. And there's a form and format for meeting with them. So now Zach gave that responsibility to them, but he also had a mechanism for managing. How are you doing? Those are the top 2 things on their agenda. They start with labor hours, and we don't talk about labor dollars with foremen because that's not the world they live in, but they live in people and hours, right? Right. And then secondly, the 2-week look ahead. If you have a mechanism for getting feedback, and they have feedback that they're managing. Remember, I said a little while ago, if it can't be measured, it can't be managed. So are they getting the feedback they need in a timely manner? And do you have a mechanism for managing it? So the way to get out of micromanaging is, first of all, be really clear about the results that you're wanting people to produce. Choose the most critical and important elements of it, and then have a mechanism for sitting down and reviewing it. And this is the other thing that happens is, again, back to the example of Zach, when he first started doing this with the foreman, they came with blank forms, that 2-week look ahead, regardless of the fact that he had written procedures, he had trained them on. They were blank, and they were blank for a while. And then they started being more filled out. Because the meeting, first of all, there was a clear agenda before they started. Those were always the top 2 priorities. And it became a coaching opportunity for him. So what he was teaching, the form and format of it gave him an opportunity to teach these guys how to think, not here, like in the moment, but looking up and looking out and going, all right, like, where am I headed? Which had their world get much more controlled, much more, they were much more successful. Projects started coming in more on time, on budget, as promised. In that process, I've done this with lots of companies over the years and helped them implement that process. And I've just repeatedly seen again and again how it makes all the difference in the world in building and being able to grow a construction business. And like I said, the most successful contractors I know, they're very consistent in following up and having good feedback, having information to let you know, where am I compared to where I want to be? And the thing about, I want to add one other thing about all this. Like, when you get data, when you get feedback, numbers in and by themselves don't mean anything. They only mean something in relationship to something else. So they mean something in relationship to your budget, if it's a project and it's job hours. It means something in relationship to, your company operating budget or your sales goal, your gross profit margin goal. It means something in relationship, maybe sometimes, to industry standards. Do you know what the industry standard is for, let's say, gross profit margin, which contractors live and die by? Do you know what that standard is? If you know what that standard is, then you can start to look at, all right, how am I running my business? What can I do to impact that, change that?
Love that. All right, we've talked about a lot of stuff here, but and there's a lot of stuff to dig into, right? So, which is so cool. I love studying businesses and how they tick and what makes the best businesses grow, right? So sometimes a lot of that is the mistakes that you make. Right. Sometimes, a lot of times, that's how we all as entrepreneurs learn, right? That's, as humans, we learn. So what are some of the common mistakes that you see with roofing companies? What do they make and how do they avoid those things?
I would say one big mistake is they think that volume over margin will have them win the game. And it doesn't. So just going, well, if I'm cheaper, less expensive, and I just sell more work, then I'm going to have a ton of work and I'm going to have a ton of volume and I'm going to make a ton of money. In my book, so I wrote a book called The Profit Bleed, How Managing Margin Can Save Your Contracting Business. And in the book, I share a story. It's actually written as a parable. And I share the story of these partners in a construction business who had that theory in like 2008, 2009. And they thought for sure that strategy was going to work. And they had gone from making $250,000 a year on the bottom line to losing $500,000 when they called me. Guys, your margin, what you're charging isn't even covering your overhead expenses. And then you grew in this huge way.
Yeah.
And then your systems kind of fell apart because you really weren't equipped to handle that much volume. And then you started throwing all this money at overhead expenses in order to try to fill the plugs and try to get things bolstered up, but you just weren't charging enough money. And at that point, your overhead expenses way outweighed what you were charging for overhead markup. So I would say that's one of the key things is that volume is important. Having a revenue goal is important, but sometimes that's all contractors pay attention to. And especially, I think roofing contractors, people who are in like sort of service work tend to think that way. And what I say is, I don't care if you're doing service or you're doing contract work, you live and die by margin. So being really clear about what's my margin goal and then managing to it, it is the number one thing that I have seen is the difference. It makes the difference in contractors being able to be incredibly profitable and successful.
Interesting. And that brings up something else, right? Is that's one of the things that I ask on all incoming clients and what, and I don't really dig into the actual profit margins, but I dig into, what is your average cost per roof? And they are wildly different. I see them anywhere from, they will say, and industry standard is $15,000, right, for a new roof just in America right now. And I see a lot of people saying, well, our average is 8,000 or 10,000. And what's going through my mind is, are you charging enough? Because if you're not even at industry standard, why? Why is that? And a lot of the times it's because they're not confident in their marketing, right? So they're going for that volume.
Well, they're not, I think that they're not confident in their marketing, but a lot of times they just don't know their numbers. So whether that's they're not job costing or they're not looking at their jobs post-mortem and really seeing what the rate of return is. If you don't know those things, then you're in a constant hustle.
Absolutely.
That's exhausting.
And by the way, that's every single business out there. This isn't just for contractors, right? This is every single business. You have to know your numbers, right? And be clear about them.
Yeah.
So, Vicki, looking forward, right? What do you see in the industry as some trends that you're seeing that we should be paying attention to?
I think that one of the big things is understanding that technology is the future.
Yeah.
And I've run into a lot of contractors who really avoid technology. And it doesn't mean you have to get the latest, brightest, shiniest new technology thing, but understanding that, especially because we have been living for a very long time in a labor shortage in the industry. And we're not seeing some huge turnaround in that.
Yeah.
And I think that now more than ever, we need to be really looking at what are the ways that we can use technology to be more efficient and to help us manage better, as opposed to the very manual way that, a lot of us grew up managing before there were computers. And then I think the other thing is understanding that there's new developments in tech in the material world that are happening all the time. And I don't know what those are in particular in the roofing world, but I know in the wood world, there's a whole new approach to doing building in terms of being able to, put together prefab, a lot of stuff that's prefab, especially in framing. So, I think the industry is evolving all the time in terms of both of materials and technology. And I think just staying in front of it and understanding what it is and putting yourself in situations where you can learn about that.
Absolutely. And so I've had clients that literally just did not keep up with technology, and they're at some point trying to sell their business, and when I asked for a customer database, right? That is a common thing that you should have, is a customer database, whether that's in AccuLinks or Job Nimbus, wherever, it doesn't matter, even QuickBooks, right? He had it completely written. I'm like, your accountant must hate you, right? Because he said that he did his books by hand, and I'm like, oh wow,
man, that's painful. Yeah, for him and for them. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, right, and for their marketer, because their marketer needs their database, right?
Yeah, and that's the lowest hanging fruit, right? Is your customer base. It's like at the very least, like you said, like have it in QuickBooks, have it somewhere where you can tap into it easily and connect with those people. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. We're going to pause here in between this round of questions and lightning round and for a message from our sponsor, roofingsites.com. Since 2018, roofingsites.com has helped roofers double their sales by getting their marketing right using the 4R roofing marketing system. If you're a roofing company owner wanting to grow your business, be sure to go to roofingsites.com and sign up for a roofing marketing strategy session with me. All right, and we're back for the lightning round. Vicki, we have one rule on this, and basically you have to answer each question in underneath a minute. Are you ready for that?
I'm ready.
Awesome. All right. So question number one, what is your favorite personal hack? This could be a book, podcast, whatever. Anything goes here. We're Roofer Growth Hacks.
I'm currently reading The Four Agreements by Miguel Ruiz, and I read it years ago, and one of the first agreement is be impeccable with your word. The second agreement is don't take anything personally. The third one is do your best, and the fourth one is that's the fourth one. Always do your best, and then third one is don't make assumptions. I even have a little thing on my monitor, and I've had that for years. In rereading the book, the first agreement about being impeccable with your word, I thought was, my takeaway the first time was, do what you say you're going to do. Keep your agreements, like follow through, like, have integrity in your word with other people. Right. And as I'm rereading it, what it's about is keeping your word with yourself and having integrity with how you speak to yourself and think about yourself influences how we engage with other people. So if we're super critical to ourselves, you know what? This comes back to leadership too. Mm-hmm. We tend to be more critical of other people when we have, and I think we are very hard on ourselves as human beings. So it was kind of like, it's mind blowing to me when I reread it, and I'm thoroughly enjoying that book right now.
Awesome. Okay. Next question. What is your favorite business hack? This again could be a book or podcast or whatever. Anything goes here.
Well, I think one of the best books ever written was Good to Great by Jim Collins. I know that he has a next iteration of that book out. What I love about it is that it's based on data and based on research. So that appeals to my nerdiness. But it talks a lot about people and people having the right people in the bus in the right seat and about building team. And then the other book is 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, one of the best business books, I think, about leadership and building teams. They're tried and true, really great resources about how to be in business and how to run your business and how to be successful in managing and running teams, and about building trust and having a culture where great people want to work. And I think both of those books speak to that. And it really is part of what's the difference that can make the difference in a time like this when it's really hard to find people. How do you create a culture where people want to come work for you?
Love it. Absolutely love that. And I need to go back and reread both of those books. Yeah, for sure. Okay. So next question, what is the best advice that you've ever been given, and bonus points for how you actually applied that?
It's interesting. I think it would be don't take things personally. And that has really served me well. I mean, I think that as entrepreneurs, we have to have kind of tough skin.
Yeah.
And when I can hang out in, don't take things personally, what it caused me to do is to get more curious about what was really going on for the other person or people that I was engaging with. That allowed me to stay more present and connected in whatever that conversation is. So it just has allowed me to lean in and have tougher conversations. And I think the more we can exercise that muscle of being willing to have tough conversations, whether it's with our employees, our clients, our spouses, our, our associates, like the more, and I don't mean like tough, like hard. I mean, just like being willing to be authentic, honest, vulnerable, build trust, like means that I can't be just focused on me. And so I think that whole thing about don't take things personally was huge, great advice for me, because I used to be super tough on myself. And then it made it very difficult to have hard conversations with other people.
Love that. Absolutely love that. Well, Vicki, how can the Roofer Growth Hacks family get in touch with you, and how can we support you and encourage you moving forward?
You can reach me at Vicki@SuiterBusinessBuilders.com. It's Suiter, and Vicki is Vicki. And you can also check out my group called the Contractors Collective. It's a group of business owners where there's masterminding, you get coaching with me, lots of tools, and like all the stuff and tools and resources that I've built over these years, a lot of training in that's available to people. So it's a great way to help contractors, especially starting out or who are, not, they haven't quite figured it all out yet, that they want some help and tools, and even things like job descriptions or training about how to hire people. That's all included in there. So it's the contractorscollective.com.
Love that. Love it. All right, roofers, you heard it right here. Make sure you go there and go get signed up and start learning how to run a business instead of letting the business run for you or run you, right?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this and enjoyed all of these knowledge bombs that you've been dropping here. Thank you so much for coming on.
You are so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Well, how about that, roofers? Was that pretty awesome or what? I know that I wrote down like 2 pages worth of notes here. Vicki is very knowledgeable on helping contractors in general build their businesses. And really the biggest takeaways that I had from that was, where she talked about, first of all, making sure that on the leadership side, that we give clear directions and that we make sure that we have our KPIs set right, that are measurable, that we can look at on a regular basis, right? She talked about the 2-week look ahead. I think that's just excellent. Just to have that ingrained into your business, and as the owner, and that you are leading and managing people right below you, make sure that you have that built in. I love how she talked about how the number one mistake that people make in business, I think in general, but she's talking about contractors specifically here, is volume over margin. Okay. That you feel that you can go with that lower cost, but what happens is that it eats into your bottom line. Right. And, eventually it's going to come and bite you. And so I'm 100% believer in having a decent profit margin on all of your services. Okay. And then the last bit of advice that she said, and I absolutely love this, is don't take things personally. I have been accused, not accused, but I've done that myself on when I take things very personally, because it is hard when you're in business to not do that. Your roofing company is your baby. And when people say things, bad about that, or things just go wrong, or people are not very happy with the way things turned out, and that negative review comes out, it's easy to take it personally and to lash back out. But if you remove yourself from that, I think that your response becomes a lot better in the long run. Well, that's going to do it for another episode of Roofer Growth Hacks. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you connect with Vicki online on LinkedIn, on Instagram, wherever that she is. Just go and connect with her. Also, while you're out there, make sure you connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook, or just go to roofingsites.com. I want to give a huge shout out to our sponsor, roofingsites.com. Since 2018, roofingsites.com has helped roofers double their sales by getting their marketing right using the 4R roofing marketing system. If you're a roofing company owner wanting to grow your business, be sure to go to roofingsites.com and sign up for a roofing marketing strategy session with me. Also, this past year, I published my book, The Ultimate Guide to Digital Marketing for Roofers. If you're a roofing company owner and you don't have this book in your hands, I will send it to you for free. Just go to go.roofingsites.com and I will send you a free copy of my book. Well, roofers, join me next time when we connect with another great roofing entrepreneur and learn how they hack their growth. Until then, I'm Chris Hunter. Thanks and gig 'em.